when I was 10, my world turned upside down. My mom passed away, and it was just me and my dad after that. He did his best to raise me alone, and despite everything, I never felt unloved. He was my rock, my biggest supporter, and my safe place. For years, it was just the two of us, and I never imagined that would change. Then, when I was 16, my dad remarried. Her name was Sandra. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Chloe, who was a year older than me, and Ben, who was a year younger. At first, I tried to be optimistic. My dad was happy, and I wanted to believe that this could be a good thing. Sandra was polite, overly so, like she was trying too hard to make a good impression, but it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. At first, it was subtle, little things that I could almost convince myself were accidental. If we went out for ice cream, they'd get their orders first, and I'd be an afterthought. If Sandra picked up takeout, there'd be meals for Chloe and Ben, but mine would be missing. The real shift happened when we moved into a new house together. It had 4 bedrooms, one for my dad and Sandra, one for Chloe, one for Ben, and one tiny room at the end of the hall that was mine. Chloe's room had a balcony, Ben had a built-in study area. Mine barely fit a bed and a dresser. I tried to talk to my dad about it, but he brushed it off. "It's just an adjustment period," he'd say. "Let's give it time." But time only made things worse. Sandra started planning family nights, always on days when I had extracurriculars. They'd go out to dinner or the movies without me, and when I asked why, Sandra would act surprised. "Oh, we didn't think you'd be interested," she'd say with a fake smile. Chloe and Ben started forming their own inside jokes, laughing about things that happened while they were out with their mom. I was never part of the conversation. Then came the bigger things. Chloe and Ben got new clothes every season. I got hand-me-downs or nothing at all. They got extra allowances for good behavior. I got nothing because, apparently, I didn't contribute enough. Sandra imposed strict rules on me: curfews, chores, no friends over. Chloe and Ben? They did whatever they wanted. If I pointed it out, Sandra would sigh and say, "Sophie, stop being so dramatic." My best friend, Mia, was the first to call it out for what it was. "They're pushing you out," she told me. "They want you to feel like you don't belong." And she was right. It was too deliberate to be anything else. One of the worst moments happened on my dad's birthday. I spent the entire evening baking his favorite cake from scratch. I decorated it carefully, making sure it was perfect. When it was finally time to bring it out, I went to wash my hands, and by the time I came back, Sandra was already in the kitchen, taking the cake to the table. She smiled at everyone and told them how much effort it took, how she had spent all day making it. I stared at her, stunned. She didn't even hesitate. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to say something, but he just smiled and thanked her. Then came Christmas. I don't know why, but a small part of me thought maybe, just maybe, it would be different. But when we opened gifts, the difference was glaring. Chloe got expensive makeup, designer sneakers, a brand new phone. Ben got video games, high-end headphones, new clothes. I got a generic sweater, a candle, and a book I had never mentioned wanting. My dad shifted uncomfortably, looking at my gifts and then at theirs, like he was finally starting to see what was happening, but he still didn't say anything. The final straw came a few weeks later. They planned a trip to a theme park. I overheard them talking about it, and I was actually excited. It had been so long since we'd done something as a family. But when the day arrived, I came downstairs, dressed and ready to go, only to find an empty house. They had already left. I called my dad, thinking maybe it was a mistake, that they had just left early and I could still meet them there. His phone went straight to voicemail. Hours later, they came home, laughing, carrying souvenir bags, and talking about how much fun they had. No one even acknowledged that I had been left behind. That night, I sat in my tiny bedroom and made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for things to change anymore. I started looking into scholarships, researching colleges far away, and figuring out how to become independent as soon as possible. If they didn't want me to be part of this family, I wouldn't be. But I wasn't going to let them break me either. The isolation kept getting worse. It wasn't just the occasional exclusion anymore, it was constant. Sandra started planning family trips, outings, and even small get-togethers, but I wouldn't find out about them until it was too late. One afternoon, I came downstairs to see suitcases by the door. Everyone was dressed like they were headed somewhere. When I asked, Sandra looked at me with fake surprise. "Oh, we're just taking a quick weekend trip. Didn't your dad tell you he hadn't?" By the time I turned to him, he looked guilty but said, "I thought you were busy with school." The trip was already paid for, the car packed, and there was no extra room booked for me. At school, things weren't much better. I started noticing that my study materials weren't where I left them. My notes would be missing, my textbooks misplaced. I'd leave my laptop in my room and come back to find tabs open to completely unrelated websites, as if someone had been messing with it. Chloe and Ben started using my desk when I wasn't home, claiming they needed more space. It got to the point where I had to carry my important papers with me at all times just to keep them from getting lost. Whenever I tried to talk to my dad, Sandra had already gotten to him first. "She's just being overly sensitive," she'd tell him. It's normal for siblings to have little disagreements. And because he didn't see what was happening when he wasn't home, he believed her. He told me to try harder to get along, not realizing I was the only one making any effort. Then the car key incident happened. My dad had given me permission to borrow his car for emergencies. But one morning, when I went to grab the keys, they were gone. I searched everywhere. When I asked Sandra, she barely looked up from her coffee. "Maybe you misplaced them." My dad was already at work, so I had no way to get to school that day. Hours later, I overheard Chloe laughing on the phone about how much fun she had at a party the night before. She had taken the car. She didn't even try to hide it. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes. "Relax, I put gas in it." Sandra shrugged it off, saying Chloe didn't know it was off limits. My dad didn't find out until weeks later when he noticed the mileage was higher than expected. Then there were the lies to extended family. When we had relatives over, I noticed the way they spoke to me started changing. My aunt, who had always been kind, suddenly started asking if I was still giving my dad a hard time. My uncle asked why I didn't want to be part of the family. I pieced it together quickly. Sandra had been telling everyone I was difficult, rebellious, refusing to bond with them. It didn't matter what I said, their minds were already made up. My birthday was the last thing I was holding on to. I had made plans with my dad to have a nice dinner, just the two of us. But on the day of, Sandra suddenly sent him out on errands. Every time he finished one, there was another. By the time he got home, it was late. There was no dinner, no cake, just a half-hearted happy birthday from Sandra and the others. My dad saw the disappointment on my face, and for the first time, I saw something shift in him. He was starting to notice. Mia, my best friend, had an idea. "Record it," she told me. "Get proof." I started documenting everything: missed invitations, conversations where I was told after the fact, even small things like groceries, missing only when I asked for something specific. It didn't take long before it paid off. One night, my dad asked why I hadn't joined them for dinner. Before I could answer, Sandra smoothly replied, "She said she didn't want to come." I pulled out my phone and showed him the messages. There was no invitation. My dad didn't say anything at first, just looked between me and Sandra. She laughed it off, saying I must have missed it, but I could tell he wasn't so sure anymore. From then on, my dad started watching things more closely. The atmosphere in the house changed. Chloe and Ben weren't as blatant about their jokes. Sandra made sure not to leave me out so obviously, but the damage had already been done. When my dad tried to set up family bonding time, Chloe and Ben barely participated. They made it clear I wasn't part of their family. Sandra retaliated in quieter ways. Groceries I liked stopped being bought. The Wi-Fi started cutting out whenever I needed it, but Chloe and Ben had no issues. I was locked out of common spaces when I came home from school. But I found ways around it. I started going to the public library to study. I used the school's internet for my assignments. And most importantly, I found a way to make money. I started doing freelance work, online small gigs at first. But it built up. I didn't tell anyone. I saved everything. It gave me a sense of control, knowing I was working towards leaving. Then came the credit card incident. One afternoon, my dad got an alert about a large purchase on his card, hundreds of dollars spent on clothes. Sandra casually said, "Oh, Sophie probably forgot to tell you. I wasn't even home when it happened." My dad checked the bank records, saw the location, and realized I couldn't have been responsible. Chloe and Ben had used his card, assuming he wouldn't notice. The acceptance letter arrived in a thick envelope, and I knew what it meant before I even opened it. My dream college. Far from this house, far from everything that had been weighing me down. I stood in the kitchen, envelope in hand, when Sandra walked in. She glanced at it and gave a forced smile. "That school is really expensive. Your father and I were thinking it would be better if you went somewhere closer to home." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I had been waiting for this moment. "I've got it covered," I said. Sandra's smile faltered. I pulled up my savings account on my phone and showed her. All months of freelancing, tutoring, and doing whatever I could to save had added up. Through a mix of freelancing, tutoring, and a partial scholarship, I had saved enough to cover my move, my first semester, and a small emergency fund. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start fresh. "I don't need anything from you," I said, and for the first time, she had no response. My father walked in as the tension hung in the air. He saw the envelope in my hand and asked what was going on. Sandra quickly recovered, saying she was just concerned about expenses, about how I'd manage on my own. My father looked at me, and I could tell something in him had already shifted. "We'll figure it out," he said. That was when the guilt tripping started. Suddenly, Sandra acted like she cared. She started bringing up how empty the house would feel without me, how she had always wanted us to be a close family, how she wished I would reconsider and stay local. It was all so transparent. I had spent years being excluded, ignored, and pushed aside, and now she wanted to act like my absence would be a loss. Chloe and Ben had a different reaction. The second they realized I was actually leaving, their entitlement kicked in. Ben casually mentioned how he'd love to have my desk. Chloe made a passing comment about needing a new laptop, glancing briefly at mine. But when I ignored her, she quickly dropped the subject, realizing I was no longer an easy target, like I owed them something. Before I left, I ignored them. That night, my father knocked on my door. He sat down across from me and, for the first time, asked, "Tell me the truth. How do you really feel about all of this?" I told him everything: the exclusion, the manipulation, the way they had made it their mission to push me out while he wasn't looking. I didn't soften any details. He sat there in silence, listening, and when I finished, he looked shaken. "I should have seen it sooner," he admitted. I didn't want to believe it. The next morning, Sandra had a new plan. If I had money to support myself, then surely I should contribute to the household before leaving. She called it a family loan, just a small amount to help with expenses since I had been living here for free. I laughed. I had been buying my own essentials for years. I had been excluded from family trips, family gifts, family allowances. I owed them nothing. My father walked in during the conversation, and for the first time, he didn't back her up. He looked at her and said, "She doesn't owe you anything." That was when Chloe switched tactics. The same person who had spent years making me feel like an outsider was suddenly trying to act friendly. She started reminiscing about old times, pretending like we had ever been close. It was obvious she thought being on my good side would benefit her somehow. I didn't entertain it. I started packing. My father noticed and, instead of looking sad or hesitant, he simply said, "I support your decision." I saw the way Sandra's expression hardened at those words. She had spent so much time making sure I was isolated, But now she was the one losing control. Then came the financial unraveling. My father had always been the main provider, but now that he was paying closer attention, he started asking more questions about where the money was going. He started pulling back, not blindly handing over his income like he used to. I could see the panic in Sandra's eyes. Chloe and Ben weren't going to get everything handed to them like before. It all came to a head at a family gathering. Sandra, desperate to regain control, tried to paint me as ungrateful. She spoke about how she had done everything to make me feel like part of the family, and how I was abandoning them. But this time, people weren't so quick to nod along. My father didn't defend her. A few relatives exchanged glances. I wasn't the one who looked bad, she did. Ben, who had been spoiled his entire life, finally snapped. He muttered something about how I was ruining everything, how our father was changing because of me. He saw it before even Sandra did. Things were shifting, and their comfortable lifestyle was slipping through their fingers. The day I left, I didn't take anything that tied me to them. My father helped me load my bags into the car. He hugged me before I got in. "I'll visit," he said. "I promise." Sandra, Chloe, and Ben stood in the doorway, watching. They didn't say a word, but I could see it in their faces. They had spent years trying to push me out, and now that I was finally leaving, they were the ones panicking. Moving into my college dorm was like stepping into a new life. The room was small, nothing fancy, but it was mine, no one to take my things. No sudden rule changes designed to make me miserable, just peace. I set up my space, unpacked my bags, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. It didn't take long for the calls to start. Sandra's number popped up on my phone multiple times that first week, voicemails filled with fake concern. She talked about how I left so suddenly, how she didn't even get to say a proper goodbye, as if I hadn't spent months preparing for this. I ignored every message. Then Mia came to visit. She was barely through the door before she told me what she had overheard. She ran into Chloe at a coffee shop, loudly complaining to a friend about how Dad is being so stingy now, and how their mother was stressed about money. Apparently, things had started changing the second I left. Back home, my father slowly started noticing things he had ignored for years. It began with small realizations how little appreciation he received, how much money was disappearing without explanation. Over time, the cracks became impossible to ignore. He wasn't a husband or a father figure. He was their personal bank account. When he started asking more questions about finances, the cracks deepened. Chloe and Ben had been used to a lifestyle where they got whatever they wanted: expensive clothes, brand new phones, weekend outings, and random shopping sprees. But suddenly, the money flow was different. My father wasn't just handing over his card anymore. When Chloe asked for something and was told no, she had a full meltdown. Ben started complaining loudly about how things weren't fair. Meanwhile, Sandra was scrambling. When my father sat down to look at the household budget, he saw just how much had been funneled into her children. He had always assumed expenses were being split fairly, but when he looked at the numbers, it was clear Chloe and Ben had been living like royalty, while I was barely given the basics. The confrontation happened soon after. He asked Sandra outright why Sophie had always been treated differently. Sandra tried to brush it off, saying it was complicated and that I had been difficult to bond with. But my father didn't let it go. He pointed out how I had been excluded, how I had to work for everything while Chloe and Ben got everything handed to them. Sandra kept deflecting, but the more she spoke, the more obvious it became she had no real excuse. Then came another revelation. My father asked about my missing belongings, a few things I didn't have room to take with me: books, a jewelry box from my mother, a few personal keepsakes. They were gone. Sandra looked uncomfortable. Chloe, however, slipped up. She casually mentioned how she had borrowed a few things. My father turned to her and asked what exactly she had taken. That was when the backtracking began. First, she denied it completely. Then, when pressed, she changed her story. She claimed I had never said I wanted those things, as if it was my fault for not putting a lock on them. When my father kept pushing, she finally started crying, saying she didn't think it was a big deal. It was a big deal. After that, my father started sleeping in the guest room. It was a quiet, undeniable shift in their marriage. Sandra tried to pretend everything was fine, but the tension in the house was obvious, and my father wasn't staying silent about it. He started talking to extended family, telling them what he had realized, what he had ignored for too long. And suddenly, those same relatives who once saw me as difficult were starting to see Sandra for who she really was. Meanwhile, Chloe and Ben were struggling. Without unlimited spending money, they started acting out at school. Teachers were calling home, reporting attitude problems, skipped assignments, and general entitlement. The comfortable life they had always known was slipping, and they didn't know how to handle it. At first, Sandra acted indifferent to my absence, but over time, I started hearing from extended family little comments about how she hoped I was doing. Well, how she wished things had been different. Eventually, when my father started cutting her off financially, the messages became more direct, pushing for reconciliation. I made my response clear. I wanted nothing to do with her. Then I blocked her. No more voicemails, no more fake concern, no more attempts to reel me back in. And the moment I did, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The news spread fast. My father had filed for divorce. It was official. He was done with Sandra. I first heard about it through a relative who called me, almost shocked that he had actually gone through with it. It had only been a few weeks since I left for college, but without me there as a distraction, my father had finally seen things for what they were. He had spent years convincing himself that Sandra cared about him, that she wasn't just using him. But once he started looking at their life without the filter she had put up, the truth was impossible to ignore. Sandra found out when she was served the divorce papers, and she lost it. She screamed at my father, accusing him of abandoning his family and choosing Sophie over them. She went on about how he was ruining the life they had built, how he was heartless for turning his back on Chloe and Ben. But my father had already made up his mind. That was when reality started sinking in for her. Without my father's financial support, her entire way of life was crumbling. Chloe and Ben were used to spending money like it grew on trees. My father had always been the one funding their lifestyle: expensive clothes, endless subscriptions, the latest gadgets, frequent trips. But now, that safety net was disappearing. In an attempt to soften the blow, my father offered a final compromise. He agreed to cover one more year of their housing costs so they could adjust. But after that, they were on their own. No more unlimited spending. No more credit cards. Just one last year to figure things out. Sandra tried every tactic she could think of. The anger turned to pleading. She cried, promising they could work through this, that she had made mistakes but could change. But my father had spent too much time reflecting, going over everything he had ignored, and this time, he wasn't going to let her manipulate him. He stayed firm. Chloe and Ben didn't take the news well either. They were furious. But instead of blaming their mother for mismanaging everything, they turned their frustration toward me. Within hours of the news breaking, they were posting online, making vague complaints about certain ungrateful people who had ruined their family. I ignored it. They had spent years treating me like an outsider, and now they were dealing with the consequences of their own actions. Meanwhile, my father reached out. He wanted to talk. For the first time, he genuinely apologized, not just in passing, but fully acknowledging how much he had ignored. He admitted that he had let his love for Sandra blind him, that he should have stepped in when I was younger, that he had failed to protect me. We met for dinner at a quiet place near my college, and for the first time in years, it felt like he was really present. He told me he had been going through their finances, realizing just how much money had been funneled into Sandra's children, while I had been left with almost nothing. He was angry not just at her, but at himself for not seeing it sooner. I told him to protect himself. Sandra had spent years using him, and she wasn't going to go down without a fight. I suggested hiring a lawyer to ensure she couldn't drain him any further during the divorce settlement. He nodded, saying he had already started looking into it. But Sandra wasn't done yet. In a last-ditch effort, she cornered my father and told him she would spread rumors that he had been abusive if he didn't reconsider the divorce. She tried to play it off as a warning, saying she didn't want things to get messy. But my father called her bluff immediately. He told her he had already gathered proof of her financial manipulation, her favoritism, and her treatment of me over the years. If she wanted to fight dirty, he was more than ready to push back. That was when she panicked. She thought she could control the narrative. But instead, my father started telling the truth to the extended family. For years, she had painted me as the problem, the difficult stepdaughter who refused to integrate into the family. But now, with my father openly discussing what had happened, the story was shifting. When Sandra tried to turn the family against him, claiming he was abandoning her, people started asking questions. They wanted to know where all the money had gone, why she had let her children live so comfortably while I had been barely considered part of the household. She wasn't prepared for that level of scrutiny. She fumbled through excuses, but instead of sympathy, she was met with skepticism. The power she held over my father for so many years was slipping, and for the first time, she had no way to stop it. The divorce became public knowledge fast. People who had once sided with Sandra, believing her stories about being a caring stepmother, started distancing themselves. It wasn't just that she had lost control over my father, it was the realization that she had lied to so many people for years. When the truth came out about how she had drained my father's finances while treating me like an outsider, her carefully crafted image started falling apart. Chloe and Ben were hit the hardest. Without my father's money supporting them, they had to downsize. The house that had once been their personal playground was too expensive, and within weeks, they had moved into a much smaller apartment. Their spending habits didn't adjust as quickly as their circumstances, and soon, complaints started showing up online about how unfair life had suddenly become for them. Sandra, in a last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation, started telling anyone who would listen that my father had emotionally abandoned the family. She claimed he had changed overnight, that he had turned his back on her and her children without warning. But by this point, too many people knew the truth. My father had spoken to extended family, showing them proof of the financial manipulation and favoritism. Sandra's version of events didn't hold up under scrutiny. For the first time in years, my father started focusing on himself. He admitted that the marriage had worn him down, made him doubt himself, and caused him to ignore things he should have addressed long ago. He started therapy, determined to heal and not let himself be manipulated like that again. Sandra, meanwhile, wasn't done trying to milk him for money. She took him to court, demanding more financial support, claiming that she needed it to maintain stability for Chloe and Ben. But my father had come prepared with clear evidence of how she had mismanaged the household funds and prioritized her own children over me. Her case fell apart. The legal battle stretched on for months, with Sandra trying every delay tactic possible. But in the end, the court granted her only a minimal settlement, just enough to meet legal obligations, but far from the comfortable life she had expected. She wouldn't be draining him any further. Then, out of nowhere, Chloe and Ben started messaging me from new numbers. After years of ignoring me, mocking me, and treating me like I didn't belong, they were suddenly acting like nothing had ever happened. The messages were casual, as if we had always been close. Ben asked how college was going. Chloe made a comment about how she missed hanging out, and how we should catch up. It was obvious what was happening. They had lost everything, and now they were looking for someone else to fall back on. I ignored them. While they were scrambling to figure out how to live without constant handouts, my life was finally moving forward. I was thriving in college, excelling in my classes, and making real friends, people who actually cared about me. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, waiting for the next passive-aggressive comment or cruel exclusion. My father and I started meeting regularly, having dinners and catching up like we hadn't been able to in years. The more time we spent together, the more I saw how much lighter he seemed, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He thanked me more than once for helping him see the truth, for pushing him to take back control of his life. Sandra, still desperate to control the narrative, took her complaints online. She posted about being betrayed by her husband and his ungrateful daughter, painting herself as the victim. But unlike before, people weren't buying it. The comment sections weren't filled with sympathy but questions she couldn't answer without exposing herself further. As for Chloe and Ben, their downfall wasn't just financial. Without the privilege they had always relied on, they struggled in school. Their social circles started shrinking. They were no longer the ones with endless money to throw around. And without that, they didn't have much to offer. I knew this wasn't the end. Sandra wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly, and I wouldn't be surprised if she tried something again in the future. But for now, I was free from their manipulation, their entitlement, their attempts to control me. And for the first time in a long time, I had no reason to look back. Sandra refused to go down without a fight. Instead of finalizing the divorce quickly, she dragged it out for months, hoping my father would get tired and agree to give her more money just to be done with it. She filed unnecessary paperwork, requested delays, and made every excuse possible to stall the process. She still believed she could manipulate him like before, but she underestimated how much he had changed. His lawyer went through everything with a fine-tooth comb and found something even my father hadn't expected. Sandra had been secretly using his money to pay off debts he never even knew existed. She had maxed out credit cards under his name and had been funneling money into accounts meant to cover her own expenses. When this was brought up in court, she had no choice but to admit it. All those years, she had acted like she was financially independent, like she was his equal. But when the numbers were laid out, it became obvious without him. She had nothing. The judge ruled in my father's favor. Sandra had to walk away without the cushy alimony she had been expecting. She was furious. She had built her entire life around my father's money, and now it was gone. The house was next. She couldn't afford the mortgage, so she had to sell it. She and her children moved into a much smaller apartment, a far cry from the comfortable life they had once known. Chloe and Ben didn't handle the transition well. Chloe resented having to budget for the first time in her life. Ben attempted a few part-time jobs but couldn't hold one down. They had never learned responsibility because they had never needed to. Now, reality was hitting them hard. Sandra, desperate to maintain some semblance of her old life, tried to keep up appearances. She went to social events, acting as if nothing had changed. But people had heard about the divorce. They had heard about the financial deception. One by one, her social circle shrank. Invitations stopped coming. People distanced themselves. The final divorce meeting was the last time my father ever saw her. She made one last attempt at manipulation, talking about how they had once been a family, how he was being cruel. My father didn't engage. He simply stood up, walked out of the room, and never looked back. With Sandra gone, my father started reconnecting with people he had lost touch with during the marriage. He reached out to old friends and family, rebuilding relationships that had suffered while he had been trapped in that household. One night over dinner, he apologized to me again, not just for the past, but for not seeing things sooner. He told me he was proud of me, that he was grateful I had stayed strong even when he hadn't been there. Chloe and Ben, meanwhile, continued to struggle. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that Ben had been getting into fights, skipping school, and getting into trouble. Without structure or discipline, he was spiraling. Sandra, for the first time, realized she wasn't in control anymore. Chloe, still desperate for an easy way out, messaged me out of nowhere. She acted like we had always been on good terms, telling me she missed me and that we should catch up. I ignored her. It was obvious what she wanted. Then came my college graduation. My father was in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. There were no messages from Sandra, no fake apologies from Chloe, no passive-aggressive posts from Ben. They were completely absent, just like they had always been. And for the first time, I realized I didn't care. My father, instead of rushing into another relationship, focused on himself. He picked up new hobbies, spent more time with friends, and strengthened his bond with me. One evening, as we had dinner together, he told me, "I should have been there for you sooner, but I'll never take you for granted again." For the first time, I truly believed him. I secured a job, moved into my own apartment, and fully moved on. The past no longer had any hold on me. Then one day, I got a long message from an unknown number. It was from Sandra. It started with fake concern, fake apologies, talk about how family should stick together. Then, at the end, she slipped in the real reason she was reaching out. She needed money, a small loan to help with a few financial troubles. I smirked, screenshotted the message, sent it to Mia with a laughing emoji, then blocked the number and deleted it without another thought. For the first time in years, I was truly free.